Alright, hey guys. In the last video we started talking about Jamestown a little bit, early English settlement of what's now the U.S. And today we're going to talk about how the colonies developed. We're going to talk about the northern colonies and how religion is a focal point of development of those colonies. We're also going to talk about the middle and southern colonies as well. So as we get into detail, we're going to see differences and similarities amongst all of the colonies. Alright, so most of the New England colonies were settled by Puritans, and these were Anglicans, members of the Church of England who thought that the church needed to be purified. They wanted simpler church services. They objected to the wealth and the power of the bishops, and basically out of that group you had separatists who were even stricter Puritans. So they were the strictest of the strict. And these people wanted to remove all traces of Catholicism from the Church of England, which was still very similar to the Catholic Church. They wanted a total separation from the Church of England because they felt that it was totally broken. However, the Church of England was the official church of Great Britain, or of England at the time. So English subjects were required to attend services, pay church taxes, and the separatists were basically fined, put in prison, and they were basically lawbreakers and were hounded by the British government. So the people we know as the Pilgrims today come from this group of separatists. They had left to go to the Netherlands because it was a place of religious tolerance, and however, over the years they noticed their children were becoming more Dutch than English. War with Spain seemed near, which was going to influence the Dutch Netherlands, so they decided to move to the New World. William Bradford was the leader, and he and 35 separatists joined 66 other people who they called strangers on the Mayflower. So less than half of the Mayflower is actually made up of what we call pilgrims today. They were sponsored by the Virginia Company, and they intended to land near the Hudson River. However, they wound up much further north at Cape Cod and what is today Massachusetts. They founded Plymouth Colony south of present-day Boston. The colony itself never grew very large, but it does provide a draw to other colonists to come to Massachusetts. So Puritan merchants in England formed the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and their leader John Winthrop set out with 11 ships and 700 people for New England. And this colony had many more people working, and it grew much faster than Plymouth. Many other towns sprout up, and the Massachusetts General Court was formed. So the success of the Plymouth and the Massachusetts Bay colonies sets off a rush into New England called the Great Migration. And during this period, in the mid-1600s, over 20,000 English men and women settle in what is now New England today. Although most of these settlers were Puritans, by no means were all of them Puritans, and some of who were Puritans had different ideas about how the role religion should play in society. So very early on in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, people began to leave and settle new towns and regions. One of these leaders was Thomas Hooker, who was a Puritan minister. He and his congregation settled in the Connecticut River Valley, which will become the colony of Connecticut. They adopted America's first written constitution called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, and it actually extended voting rights to all free men, not just members of the church. It was the first to do so. Roger Williams, who you should have probably learned about in middle school, was a separatist minister who believed in religious tolerance, unlike many of the Puritans, and the separation of church and state. So he bought land from the Narragansetts to establish the colony, or the town of Providence, which means God's will or God's favor, God's grace. That is going to develop into the colony and later state of Rhode Island. So Roger Williams is an important early figure. And Hutchinson, a woman, pushes against puritanical views and says, that people don't need necessarily a minister's teaching to be spiritual. They have a personal relationship with God without the church intervening. For this, she was imprisoned, tried, and actually banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, her brother-in-law leaves Massachusetts as well during the same time, and they start a settlement in what is now known as New Hampshire. In 1679, it becomes a royal colony under the direct control of the king. So you see this spread of dissenters leads to the colonization of much of the rest of the East Coast. Now, were some similarities amongst the colonies that develop in New England and the northern part of the colonies. For instance, education was very important to most of these settlers. Massachusetts General Court passed education laws. Even girls learned reading, writing, and some arithmetic, some mathematics. Boys had more education opportunities, and by the 1700s, you had universities developing throughout this region, the most famous and popular of which were Harvard and Yale colleges. Governmentally, most colonies or most towns and villages are led by the town meeting, and that's still true today in some of the smaller towns of America. And in this case, all church members and landowners would meet and make decisions on the town's issues. Of course, you had conflicts with Native Americans as the new settlers become less and less dependent upon Indians for survival, for their help for farming or providing food or things of that nature. They become more confrontational. Now the Native Americans have weapons of their own, so you start to have more conflicts. Many Puritans feel like the Native Americans are demonic or even of Satan himself, so they feel it's their duty to drive Native Americans out of this new land of God or kill them altogether. So land conflicts happened often, the Pequot War and the King Philip's War, and obviously the results are going to be devastating for Native Americans, almost all of whom lose their land or are killed outright. And much like in Massachusetts and other New England colonies, you're going to have a rush of settlers to the middle and southern colonies as well. And part of that is because of the English Civil War and other events during England at the time. So we're going to talk about that and how the southern colonies develop and the middle colonies as well. Now, World Civ, you probably learned about the English Civil War. But after the Civil War and the death of Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector, Charles II is restored to the crown. This is called the Restoration. And Charles is going to be important for the development of colonies because he establishes colonies to give land to his loyal friends. So you do have the establishment of 4 new colonies under Charles II: New York, New Jersey, Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And these colonies are governed by their lords proprietors, basically the people that Charles gave the land to. The Duke of York include the area that was claimed by the Dutch, New Netherlands. Their town, New Amsterdam, which is going to become New York, was already under control of the Dutch. So in 1664, an English fleet sails into New York Harbor, what's now New York Harbor, and demands surrender, and the Dutch are basically forced out of New Netherlands. So by 1964, it's reestablished as an English colony, and it's named after, he names it after himself. He renames it New York. So that's where the name comes from. It comes from the Duke of York himself. Many of the Puritans in the northern colonies are going to flock to New York for a number of reasons. One, it had a very diverse population: English, Dutch, Scandinavian, Germans, French, Native Americans, African slaves in large numbers. We still don't have the influx of Irish and Italian immigrants that we're going to see later on, but already it's diverse and it's much more tolerant. So it grows and it becomes very prosperous. Many Puritans, chafing under the strict control of the church in their colonies, and also wanting to engage in commerce and business, will go to New York. Also, he had a treaty with the Iroquois, which meant relative peace in New York and a prosperous fur trade. So Duke of York gave land south of the Hudson River to 2 of his political allies, who named it after the city of Jersey in England, and they named it New Jersey. So by the early 1700s, New York and New Jersey became royal colonies and are officially part of the British Empire. New York especially is very prosperous and urbanizes relatively quickly. Now, the same tolerance that's important for the growth of New York is going to become the bedrock of the colony of Pennsylvania. The Quakers were the most aggressively nonconformist group of the time, and people really didn't know what to make of them. They believed in direct personal communication with God, so there was no minister or hierarchy of priests and bishops and things of that nature. So they had simple meetings where their members spoke about their relationship with God. They believed in equality of all men and women. Generally, Quakers were pacifists and refused to participate in warfare, even to defend their nation. They're only welcomed at the time in Rhode Island. However, William Penn, a leader of the Quaker movement, establishes a colony and names it Pennsylvania. The capital city is going to be Philadelphia, which is Greek for city of brotherly love. By 1600s, wars in Europe had ruined farms and trade, and the constant religious clashes in Europe had caused lots of social upheaval. So Penn offered refuge for Quakers and any other groups suffering from religious persecution. You had land at reasonable prices and economic opportunities. So some of these groups, such as Amish and Mennonites, moved to Pennsylvania in large numbers. French Protestants, known as Huguenots, also will settle there in large numbers as well. Like New York, Delaware begins in the hands of one person, and England winds up taking it. It was originally settled by people from Sweden. So the Swedes settled near Wilmington, Delaware. A few years later, the Dutch take over and call it the colony that had been called New Sweden, and of course later the colony is seized by England. William Penn actually gets the Duke of York to make him the proprietor of an area along the Delaware River and Delaware Bay. And this was the area that later becomes the colony of Delaware. So you see it's changing hands as well, ultimately controlled by England. This is important to Penn because it gives Pennsylvania control of waterway that gives Pennsylvania access to the Atlantic Ocean. Since the break between Catholicism and the Church of England, life for Catholics in England had been rough for the most part. Some English Catholics, however, were influential. George Calvert, who became known as Lord Baltimore, did convert to Catholicism, and it really ended his career in Parliament. He wanted land in America to allow English Catholics to settle there. He found a settlement first in Canada, but found that the climate was not to his suiting, so he tries to move to Jamestown, was not allowed to because of his religion. King Charles finally gives him land around the Chesapeake Bay, although he dies before he can gain control of it. His son, however, receives the land and founds Maryland, and soon after they passed the Toleration Act, which says all Christians can practice their religion in Maryland, whether Catholic or Protestant. And this attracts settlers to Maryland as well. Now, religion is going to play less of a role in the southern colonies. The Carolinas, for instance, what becomes North of South Carolina, was co-owned by 8 men, and they gave themselves very large estates, and people had to pay to bring in settlers. Southern Carolina, you had a good port in Charlestown, later known as Charleston, had prosperous estates, aristocrats, plantation economy develops there. North Carolina is basically settled generally by small farmers with no slaves, and North Carolina didn't have the natural harbor to help it develop the trade of cotton as South Carolina did. Rice is also a very important crop for South Carolina plantation owners. The colony of Georgia starts by a member of English Parliament, a man by the name of James Oglethorpe, and he establishes Georgia as an alternative to prison for people in debt and things of that nature. So really, Georgia almost is kind of like a penal colony initially. They go there to work off their debts and things of that nature. Savannah is important because it's a good seaport and begins to open up trade along the Atlantic. So you have former debtors, poor people, religious refugees from Germany and Switzerland, and also an influx of enslaved Africans in the late 1700s. So Georgia becomes an incredibly diverse region. So you see the colonies have developed all in different ways, and you're starting to see the beginning of that diversity that will begin to mark America. So we'll talk more about that next time. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.